I was 35 years old and working as a press officer, going basically to any incident that was going to be of media interest. It was a very cold month, colder than usual, I would say. I got a phone call from the press bureau to say that a 19-year-old girl had been reported missing by her father. At that time, I have an 18-year-old niece called Alison. That made me feel concerned because I thought, that could be my niece.
There was growing concern today for the safety of 19-year-old Alison. She planned to travel from Romford to Stratford by train and then change to the North London line for a one-stop ride to Hackney Wick Station.
In those days, lots of people were reported missing. What, I suppose, made this a little bit out of the ordinary from a normal missing person, there was no reason why she should have gone missing. She hadn't had an argument with her family. She had a good job, a good relationship with her boyfriend. They had become engaged, so she had everything to look forward to in her coming life. You've got this whole journey from Upminster to Hackney Wick. At any stage, she could have gone missing or been abducted.
Things that we take for granted now, CCTV, DNA, telephone tracking, back in the 80s they didn't exist.
In a lot of cases it was probably more luck than judgment where you got onto the right path to follow in such an investigation.
The fact that she was a young, blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl helped enormously in getting her image into the popular papers. Red Tops would ring the press bureau on an hourly basis for news, and a missing person, the first question they'd ask was, what colour is it? Is the child or the person? And if we said black, they'd say, OK, move on. Now, that would be a shock now to people to hear that, but that was a fact, that was going on in the 80s.
There is a lot of new information. We've made appeals. The public have been very good in their response to appeals, so we've a lot of information to sift through, yes.
One of her old classmates had seen her waiting at the bus stop and had spoken to her, and she said, I'm going up to Romford railway station. Then we got a ticket collector at Stratford who said they kind of vaguely remembered a young girl coming through on a train that had come from Romford. And that's it, we don't get anything.
Nobody knows for certain, but this is very probably the last place where Alison Day was seen alive. She walked down onto the road into an area which is full of factories and derelict buildings. Police were hunting the area for the first time today. They hoped to find clues to her mystery disappearance.
I've been a career crime correspondent, 40 years on Fleet Street. Hackney Wick Station was a fairly desolate location. The station was surrounded largely by an old and semi-derelict industrial estate with a lot of things like, car breaker yards. It was a pretty grim location. The ragged end of London. Between Christmas and the New Year, people were on an extended holiday break. She was almost certainly the only person who got off the train at Hackney Wick. She might have even been the only person on the train. Put all the circumstances together and I thought, I don't think this is going to end well.
I got a phone call asking me to contact one of the officers in the case, and he told me that the underwater search unit had recovered a woman's body from the canal. She'd been raped, she'd been strangled.
Alison's body was found by police frogmen making another search of the canal. They'd already dragged it 2 days after her disappearance and had searched the banks almost daily.
I just remember my dad saying the police are coming round to have a chat with you, because no one knew anything. It was like she'd gone to meet her boyfriend, and that was the last that anyone ever saw of her.
Police are appealing for anyone who may have seen her on that journey at either Stratford or Hackney Wick stations to help them. The police are refusing to say how long her body had been in the water.
And I was just completely shocked to have her life taken away at 19.
The canal was a pretty inhospitable place, full of shopping trolleys and all sorts of rubbish that had been dumped in it. They subsequently found her coat in there as well, which had been weighted down with some concrete blocks. She was partially clothed when they brought her out of the canal.
Obviously, tests were done and fingerprints. She was identified. This is now quite obviously a murder.
The body was not disturbed until a pathologist attended.
I remember distinctly when I got this phone call to say that there'd been a murder and they'd discovered the body of a girl that had been taken out of a canal. I mean, this scene actually shows 8 or 9 police officers around the body, not one of which has got protective clothing on. Nobody's got any covers on their shoes. They're all wearing suits. There wasn't much care that was given to protecting the scene in terms of contamination. When I got to the scene, it soon became clear a tourniquet was used which had been cut from her own blouse, put tightly around her neck. A knot was formed in the front of that tourniquet, and this basically forms a very, very tight ligature leading to very quick death.
It made me feel shocked, disgusted, worried and terrified that there's someone out there who's prepared to do that to a young woman and think they can get away with it.
She had, I think there was an engagement ring on the left hand, and her watch was still on the left hand.
It now immediately elevates that from a missing person story, which isn't that interesting really, unfortunately, to something much more headline grabbing and frankly, much more sinister.
She was going to see her boyfriend. She would have been happy. So she would have been probably in a really good place then. God, they're really happy. Sorry. Yeah, brings back a lot of memories.
9 times out of 10 in a murder investigation in this country, you will learn within a day or two that the police have arrested somebody who was known to the victim. This is a stranger murder. How has she got from Hackney Wick Station into the River Lee with cobblestones in the pockets of her coat, weighting her down? Whoever has done this, there's a degree of pre-planning, of calculation. You know, it's sexually driven. It's not a robbery. She's not a member of a rival gang or anything, you know, that might have some other explanation. Somebody was waiting for a likely victim. So what is the explanation? What sort of person are the police looking for in this case? Is this the first act in something that's going to turn out to be much more dreadful?
The latest figures show that Britain is one of the most violent nations in Europe.
The rate of recorded rapes and attempted rapes in the capital went up by 56% last year.
Can you talk to me? Some of them have been women ringing up regarding a rape that they haven't reported to the police before because they've been too frightened.
Only an estimated 10% of women report attacks to the police.
In some parts of London, there are only 10 officers to look after 70,000 people.
The assets available, as they say now, were stretched pretty thin.
There was no such thing as specialist murder investigation teams. The team were brought together from that particular geographical policing area. You could have 30 or 40 people on a large inquiry crammed into an office that was really built for 10. Tired, worn out, hungry. All our investigations were conducted on a card index. Every action, every statement was documented on a card index. The only way that you could cross-check was physically cross-checking all of the documents on that index.
I went to the porter cabins at the rear of Hackney Police Station. It was a little bit of a shambolic arrangement. You could have been walking into a building site somewhere, except that there weren't a lot of hard hats knocking around. It wasn't going to impress anyone. Certainly wouldn't have appeared in too many TV programmes. Charlie Farquhar turns up as a detective superintendent with about 27 years service or something. He was very proud of being from the Kingdom of Fife.
My dad had been in the flying squad for 3 years in North London, and then he was moved to Romford, to the murder squad, and he inherited 2 inquiries that were going on at the time. One of them was the disappearance, the murder of Alison Day, and he was given the inquiry with instructions to basically close it down. We don't have the resources and there just isn't the evidence. We're not going to get anywhere. But what he actually did was he went to the officers on the ground and basically asked them what they thought, and they all said, we want to give this another go. We haven't had the chance to give this a proper go yet. And eventually there was a showdown about this, and he said to his boss, you can close it down if you want to, but you can be the one that tells Mr. and Mrs. Day that we're not going to look for her daughter's killers anymore. I think there was a couple of problems the police were facing with this. One was the lack of resources. The Wapping newspaper dispute was an enormous issue, and so many officers were being drafted in to help on that. It was really draining funds away. The other problem with this inquiry was, on the surface, there just seemed to be no evidence. There seemed to be a random attack which they couldn't connect with anything else. There didn't seem to be any particular clues that would lead anywhere. There was no forensic evidence found on Alison at all. There was no eyewitnesses. You know, that's a hell of a task, that's a hell of a commitment, really. And you can see why the easy option would have been to say, I think this is going to just remain unsolved.
I was a member of what was known as the Crime Reporters Association. We became people that the police generally would allow you some inside track access. Charlie Farquhar actually invited me one day late at night to Romford Police Station, and he allowed me to see some pictures of the post-mortem. He said, "This is a very unusual case. This is for your eyes only." And he said, "She has been strangled to death with a piece of her own clothing. This is going to be a really important piece of evidence, which is why, obviously we don't know who's done it at this stage, you can't report any of that."
Police, by very nature of the job that they do, deal with dead bodies on quite a regular basis. But this was unusual in as much as, yes, there'd been a sexual attack on this girl, but on top of that, it was the method at which she had been killed, i.e. the ligature with a garrote round the neck.
At the time, I worked on the News of the World, and we had another reporter there who was a rogue reporter. A couple of weeks after this meeting I'd had with Charlie Farquhar, the story appeared in the paper that I was working for under this reporter's byline saying, "Police hunt guitar string strangler in the Alison Day case." Basically, he just made the story up. One of Charlie Farquhar's sergeants, who I also knew very well, rang me up. He said, do you think you could get him to come out to Romford Police Station to meet with me and Charlie Farquhar? And I said, I suppose that Charlie would like to give him a piece of his mind, would he? And this guy straight-faced said, "No, Charlie would like to take him down to the cells and beat the living daylights out of him for what he's done."
He had an overwhelming morality. It was almost intimidating. I think he knew that there was something even darker going on here. He said, I remember in one interview at the time, that this is just evil. There's no underlying insanity or something. This is just evil.
Alison Day, 19 years old, was battered around the head, dragged away, strangled and dumped, hands tied, in a nearby river.
It was an uphill battle, it really was, because what evidence was there? No forensic evidence, no fingerprints. Body had been in the water for a considerable time, so obviously it was starting to decompose.
When you have a murder, there is no witness. You don't have an account of what preceded, what took place. It's a slog. It's long hours. I'm really trying to build up a picture against that constant pressure that if you don't get there, then somebody else could be next.
Marty Tamboza was a 15-year-old Dutch girl. She was due to go back to Holland on a visit, and she wanted to go to the local sweet shop to get some sweets to take back for her friends back in Holland. And she did so going along the towpath beside the railway track on her bike.
There was a length of fishing line stretched across a footpath designed to unseat somebody from a bicycle.
She suddenly comes off the bike and she's set upon. She then led away a very long distance over fields and through bushes and all sorts. and at various points she's sexually assaulted and raped, and then ultimately murdered.
Where she was living in Horsley, it's a very, very nice area. And I can imagine people down there thinking, things like that don't happen here.
We used to laugh quite a bit together, and I don't remember her being anything but sweet and fairly softly spoken and really quite charming. She was great. She was just the ideal person. We were all called in to the large gymnasium, as we called it. We were all gathered, and the headmaster, took to the lectern and said, there is we have a missing girl.
"15-year-old Marty was savagely attacked as she cycled along this footpath yesterday afternoon. She was on her way to East Horsley to buy some sweets to take with her tomorrow on holiday with some school friends to her native Holland.
Marty was a wonderful, beautiful girl whose family had come across here from the Netherlands and were living here because of Dad's work. And she was the daughter that any parent would be proud of.
Police with tracker dogs launched a massive hunt when she failed to return, and her bicycle was found last night. When the search resumed at dawn today, her fully clothed body was found by one of the Duchess of Roxburgh's workers in a copse, a mile from where the bike was dumped.
She's in the leafy lanes of what we used to call the stockbroker belt. Leafy green, well-heeled, safe Surrey. Nothing ever happens in that part of the world. It's suddenly a bolt from the blue. A teenage girl, a schoolgirl, is knocked off her bicycle, dragged into the undergrowth and murdered. That is always going to be a big story. You don't need to sensationalise the facts around that.
I think any person that takes a young life, whether it's a boy or a girl, has got to be sadistic to start with. As far as this person or persons are concerned, then they are no different. They've taken a young life, and violence has been used to do it, a considerable amount of violence.
She had injuries to her head, which subsequently were determined were caused by a blunt instrument. An attempt had been made to burn parts of the body. There was also pieces of wood laying around. Intercourse had taken place, but it would appear that the burning would have been in an attempt to destroy any forensic evidence that might have been recovered.
Scores of police officers mounted an inch-by-inch search of a wide area of woodland, whilst forensic experts used the latest laser technology in a bid to find fingerprints on Marty's body whilst it was still at the scene.
It was all over the news. It was all over the news that evening. It's grim.
On this railway footpath at Horsley in Surrey, a piece of nylon cord set in motion the last movements of a 15-year-old schoolgirl. Marty Tamboza had set out to buy sweets from a shop.
You don't even want to think about what she was subjected to, because on the news, I remember, it was just absolutely horrific. It was just horror what they showed. How could she one day be there on the playing field with us in her tracksuit bottoms, and then the next minute have been brutally murdered? I simply cannot put her there in that place.
The footpath Marty was using runs alongside a busy railway line, and police are hoping a passenger may have seen something unusual. Detectives are this evening questioning people arriving at Horsley Station in a bid to jog their memories.
One of the glimpses of the future that was happening here was the use of computers in solving a murder. And I suppose there were some people who thought, can you use computers to catch a killer? It all seemed a little bit sort of far-fetched, a bit science fiction at the time. But the Yorkshire Ripper inquiry had shown that there was something that needed to be done. They were still doing everything by hand, and it was laborious and difficult, and things were getting missed and not cross-referenced. The Surrey police had a very early version of the Holmes database, the Home Office Large Major Inquiry System, and the fact that there was a massive information coming in which could all be put into a computer, which then you could just do a keyword search on. The man-hours that were being saved by hitting one button were extraordinary. It meant even if they weren't finding the perpetrator, they were being able to narrow down certain common denominators very, very efficiently.
Charlie Farker, who was in charge of the Alison Day investigation, which was still unsolved, was talking with John Hurst.
When he phoned the officer at Surrey who was running the inquiry, on that phone call they compared notes, how the victims had died and that sort of thing. My dad kept one vital piece of information back from the press, always as a way of being able to tell if there was a copycat or whatever. My dad said, the other thing, and we've never made this public, is that a tourniquet was used. And there was this silence on the phone. The penny suddenly dropped with Surrey that was what this mysterious piece of wood lying next to the body was. They thought that it had been used as an accelerant to burning the body. It wasn't. It had actually fallen out of the knot that had been used to strangle Marty Tamboza. So there was this pause, and suddenly quickly became obvious that there was a connection.
You've got two offences that are miles apart. The common factor at that stage that initially linked the two was railway stations. Were they using the railway system as a means of travelling?
The ligature, the tourniquet looks quite broad. It seems to have come from her clothing again. And the upper part of her clothing was again disarrayed, some of it missing. And she had string tied around the hands and legs.
These crimes involve a very specific kind of twine called som yarn. It was used by carpenters or people like that, and I'm sure that somebody said to me at the time that British Rail are a big buyer of som yarn, and we're now starting to think that given the locations of the murders, both close to fairly out of the way railway stations, that are we looking for a British Rail employee?
The media at that stage linked to it as the railway murders.
And with real fears that the killer may strike again, worried parents are meeting their children off the trains.
As soon as we knew that the police were positively linking the deaths of Alison Day and Marty Tamboza, of course that takes the story into a new realm. You can, frankly, expect more terrible things to happen.
although there was this connection, this potential connection between the ligature, and it was unique and unusual in UK murder history, there was still nothing actually physical that you could say it was the same person.
19-year-old Alison Day disappeared from her home at Upminster on December the 29th. Her body was found near Hackney Wick a fortnight later. Now a new witness has come forward who saw the two men with a girl resembling Alison on the 29th.
Following further publicity on the Alison Day murder, someone pops up in Berkshire Road in Hackney and says, "Oh, I was by a phone box in Berkshire Road and I saw a girl standing, and there were two men in sheepskin coats talking to her, and then one of them grabbed hold of her and they took her off up the road."
This was a remarkable sort of breakthrough in a way, because this was a long time after the murder, and this quite eerie artist's impression was done. And this potentially would be quite a revolution in the inquiry.
There may of course be an entirely innocent explanation for this meeting, but we've had nobody in the past come forward and say that they were in Berkshire Road that night, and we appeal to anybody who was there, or those two men, to come forward so that they can be eliminated from this inquiry.
That suddenly reinvigorates the investigation, and now suddenly we might be looking for two people, and one's, it's little and large, one's tall or taller and the other one's quite short. Then we've got people saying, well, hang on, you've got this other investigation that's been going on about these North London attacks on women. What's going on there?
It's the biggest rape hunt in Britain, at least 23 separate attacks. 2 men are alleged to be responsible for a brutal series of assaults over the last 3 years.
In the Metropolitan Police at that time, it was an operation under the code name Heart that was dealing with a series of serial rapes. The majority of the offences that were being looked at on that, the victims who survived talked about 2 people being involved as their assailants. The link then was formed with the murder of Alison Day. And of course, because of the ligatures, the killing of Marty Tamboza.
This year, so far, the 2 men have attacked 12 times right across the Greater London area, from Hadley Wood to Richmond. Here at 3:15 in the morning, they grabbed a 24-year-old secretary, dragged her down to this underground car park, where they raped her.
It was very, very unusual to have a series of rapes. The very fact that there was a series taking place, the fact that there were 2 people involved, I think that made it pretty unique and very, very worrying. Very, very worrying.
Police computers have established a firm link between 19 rapes, 6 indecent assaults and 2 other attacks on women. Over 3.5 years, they took place in a wide area of North London, extending into Hertfordshire and Surrey. And detectives believe the attacks are the work of 2 men operating as a team.
What I believe that we're looking for are professional rapists. They literally come out of the night, they attack the victim, they say very little, and then they disappear again.
Be coming into work and you'd hear there was another rape last night, but there was mountains of statements relating to the rapes. There were 2 men involved, and one was noticeably taller than the other. There was also the type of attack itself. It's what you would consider calling a blitz attack.
At 1:15, a 22-year-old dancer was walking in Euston Road when 2 men pulled her into an alley in a mews some 50 yards away, and she was sexually assaulted. At 2:15, the same men had travelled 3 miles and were in Kentish Town Road, where they dragged a 20-year-old girl into a doorway. Although they had knives, she managed to escape. 1 hour later, they'd attacked their 3rd victim of the night, and she wasn't so fortunate.
You could see there was an element of planning involved. So it's this very frightening time of saying some of the people are out there doing some really bad stuff.
Single females, late at night or in the early hours of the morning, stripped, tape is placed over their mouth or over their eyes, or an item of their clothing is forced into their mouth as a gag. They are then subjected to rape. In quite a lot of cases, they are given a tissue to wipe themselves with, in the hope that that has destroyed any forensic evidence. Going back to Marty Tamboza, there was evidence when the body was found of burnt tissues near the body. Again, another link.
The girls have, on some occasions, they've been dragged down canal banks and into bushes, over fences and hedging. I can't say what mental effect it's had on some of the girls, because it's quite horrific what has happened to them.
They managed to identify various common denominators in these things. The fact they were being taken further and further from where they were abducted. They would wear balaclavas or ski masks, that sort of thing. They normally struck at night, and normally in their railway stations.
Where on earth do we go from here? What do we do? Where do we start looking? Who are your suspects? You know, I mean, the fact you've got a murder in Hackney Wick, you've got a murder in Horsley in Surrey, miles apart from each other, and you're now linking these with all the offences that are happening in northwest London. Where do you start looking for your suspects? Where do you start looking?
The forensics back then wasn't the forensics of the 90s, and certainly not the forensics of now. So they did have to look at geography, they did have to look at proximity, they did have to look at method, but it really went into 20, 30, 40 rapes. We focus so heavily on DNA nowadays, but again, looking back in the 80s, that really didn't exist. So we relied very heavily as investigators on blood grouping. And there's another element to blood grouping, which is a secretor. A person who actually secretes their blood group into other bodily fluids. They secrete their blood group into semen. So on some of the rapes in around Hampstead, there was evidence of an A secretor being one of the attackers. So somebody with an A blood group who also secreted into their semen.
Unlike the Alison Day case, in the Marty Tamboza case, there was some forensic evidence. There was evidence of an A secretor blood group. Now, immediately that happens, you've got something you can put into the database, and that's a hard fact, and you can start, cross-referencing. There was a cross-reference with one of the London rapes where tissues had been used on the victim the same way. The victim had been tied up in a similar strange fashion, this sort of prayer-like gesture, and the blood group was A secretor. Immediately, you've got a connection. And the connection not only with one of those attacks, but you've actually still got a living victim. You've got a witness who can give you more information about, who this perpetrator was. That's an enormous breakthrough. So a database was drawn up, which was for any men in the London area with any previous history of sexual attacks on women, aged between about 20 and 50, who were A secretor blood groups, which they called the Z men. And there was, couple of thousand people on it. And it was a case of simply working through that list, talking to these people, establishing alibis, physical descriptions, so on and so forth. And they just went through them one by one, and number 1,594 on that list was an unemployed carpenter from Kilburn who had a charge against him for a serious assault on his wife. And his name was John Francis Duffy.